Tonight we drift into quiet animated libraries at night, where shelves stretch upward and every surface glows with gentle warmth, and the world outside fades into something distant and soft. These are places where time moves differently, where the air itself seems to hold stillness, and where every shadow falls with a kind of tender weight that invites the body to settle, to soften, to let go. Tall wooden shelves rise before us, lined with leather-bound books that stand shoulder to shoulder in perfect silence, their spines catching faint traces of amber light, their edges worn smooth by years of gentle handling. The wood itself is dark and polished, rich with grain that runs like quiet rivers through the surface, and the shelves climb higher and higher, disappearing into the soft dimness above, holding their treasures with a patience that has no end. A soft glow spreads outward from a brass desk lamp, its light pooling across the surface of an old wooden desk, catching the curve of its metal base, the small adjustments of its hinged arm, the way the warmth seems to hum without sound. The light does not reach far, but it does not need to. It simply exists, steady and unhurried, casting everything it touches in tones of honey and gold. Dust motes float through the dim light, drifting on currents of air too subtle to feel, turning slowly as they rise and fall, catching the glow for just a moment before fading back into shadow. They move without purpose, without hurry, suspended in the stillness like tiny stars in a quiet sky, and watching them is like watching time itself slow down, unravel, and dissolve. Velvet cushions rest upon a wide armchair, their fabric deep and soft, the kind of softness that seems to draw the body inward, to cradle weight and warmth with a gentleness that asks for nothing in return. The chair sits in a corner where the light barely reaches, its arms wide and welcoming, its presence solid and comforting, a place where hours could pass without notice, without need. Raindrops trace down tall windows, each one following its own slow path along the glass, merging with others, pausing, then continuing their descent in silent procession. The sound they make is faint and rhythmic, a whisper against the panes, a soft tapping that blends into the background like a lullaby that has no words, only feeling. Moonlight spills across oak floors, stretching in long pale beams that cut through the darkness with a kind of quiet grace, illuminating the grain of the wood, the small imperfections, the places where footsteps have worn the surface smooth. The light shifts as clouds pass overhead, dimming and brightening in slow cycles, breathing with the night. A worn ladder leans against the high shelves, its wood pale with age, its rungs smooth from use, its angle just so, patient, waiting, as though it has stood there for years and will stand there for years more. It connects the floor to the heights above, offering passage to places unseen, but for now it simply rests, a quiet witness to the stillness all around. A flickering candle sits in a glass holder, its flame small and steady, bending slightly with the movement of air, casting tiny trembling shadows that dance along nearby surfaces. The wax pools slowly at its base, the scent faint and warm, and the light it offers is soft, intimate, a gentle companion in the surrounding dark. Shadowy corners hold stacked folios, their pages heavy and thick, their edges uneven, their presence barely visible in the low light. They rest in neat piles, patient and forgotten, holding words and images that no one reads tonight, existing simply for the sake of existing, adding their quiet weight to the room's gentle stillness. Warm light pools on open pages, spreading across the paper in soft circles that make the text seem to glow from within, the letters dark and crisp against cream-colored surfaces that have yellowed gently with time. The light catches the texture of the paper, the subtle weave, the way certain words seem to rise just slightly from the page, and there is something deeply restful about the way the illumination settles there, holding the pages in a tender embrace that asks nothing, that simply allows them to exist in their openness, their vulnerability, their quiet offering of stories and thoughts that wait without urgency to be received. A thick wool rug stretches under a reading table, its fibers dense and soft, woven in patterns of deep burgundy and forest green that have faded into something even softer with the passage of years. The rug absorbs sound, absorbs cold, absorbs the weight of furniture and footsteps alike, transforming everything into hushed comfort. Its edges are slightly frayed, its surface worn smooth in places where feet have passed most often, and beneath it the floor feels distant, as though the rug has created its own small world of warmth and cushioned silence that extends outward in all directions, inviting everything above it to rest a little easier, to settle a little deeper. Frost patterns bloom on night window panes, delicate crystalline formations that spread across the glass in intricate designs that no two eyes will ever see exactly the same way. The frost builds from the edges inward, creating forests of ice, ferns of cold that branch and divide with mathematical beauty, each line catching what little light exists and holding it, refracting it, turning the window into something between barrier and art. The patterns shift almost imperceptibly as the night deepens, as temperatures fall and rise by fractions, and tracing them with tired eyes becomes a meditation, a gentle anchor for thoughts that are ready to drift away into something softer than waking. Brass handles gleam on carved drawers, their metal cool and smooth, shaped to fit the curve of a hand, attached to furniture that has stood in place for longer than memory. The drawers themselves are fashioned from dark wood, their fronts decorated with simple carvings. Leaves, vines, geometric patterns that catch shadow and light in equal measure, and the handles hang with perfect balance, slightly tarnished in places where fingers have gripped them most often, polished bright where they catch the ambient glow. Each drawer suggests secrets kept, papers stored, small objects tucked away for safekeeping, but tonight they remain closed, their contents undisturbed, their presence adding only to the sense that this place holds many layers, many quiet histories that need not be explored to be felt. Gentle steam rises from a porcelain teacup, spiraling upward in thin wisps that dissolve into the air almost before they can be seen, carrying with them the faintest suggestion of warmth, of something herbal and soothing that has been steeped and now waits, cooling slowly, perfectly still on its matching saucer. The cup itself is delicate, painted with faded flowers in soft blues and greens, its rim slightly chipped in one small place that speaks of use, of care, of years of quiet companionship. The liquid inside is dark and clouded, barely moving, and the steam continues its slow rise, a visible breath in the cool library air, a reminder that warmth exists, that comfort takes many forms, and that some things need only to be present to fulfill their purpose. Leather spines stand in rows along the shelves, their colors rich and earthy. Browns that range from almost tan to deep chocolate, surfaces that have absorbed years of handling, years of sitting in just this place, gathering dust and wisdom in equal measure. Some spines show titles stamped in gold leaf that has begun to flake, others are blank, their identities known only to those who have opened them before, and still others bear markings in languages half forgotten, symbols that hint at knowledge from distant places and distant times. The leather has cracked in places, has softened in others, and running fingers along these spines, even in imagination, brings a texture that is both rough and smooth, cool and somehow alive with all the hands that have touched them before, all the eyes that have read the words contained within. A quiet hallway extends beyond the main room, visible through arched doorways that frame darkness with elegant curves of wood and stone. The hallway is narrow, its walls lined with more shelves, more books, more quiet accumulation of thought and story, and it stretches away into shadow, disappearing around corners unseen, suggesting depth, suggesting that this library continues far beyond what can be observed from any single vantage point. The arches themselves are simple but beautiful, their curves meeting at apex points that seem to hold the weight of the ceiling with effortless grace, and passing through them, even in the mind, feels like a gentle transition, a movement from one chamber of stillness into another, each as welcoming as the last. Soft lamp glow falls upon green baize cloth that covers another table, the fabric slightly worn but still rich in color, its surface providing a gentle contrast to the wood and leather that dominates so much of the space. The green is deep and restful, the kind of color that settles the eyes, that asks for nothing, that simply exists as a field of calm upon which other objects might rest. A book, a pair of spectacles, a small brass key that has no lock in sight. The cloth is stretched taut and smooth, tucked carefully at the edges where it meets the table's frame, and the light upon it creates subtle variations in shade, gentle hills and valleys of illumination that shift as the flame moves, as the night progresses, as everything continues its slow dissolution into dreams. Books rest tilted slightly on upper shelves, leaning against one another in comfortable disarray, their angles suggesting that they have been pulled out and returned, consulted and replaced, over years and decades and perhaps longer still. Some lean to the left, some to the right, creating a gentle rhythm along the shelf's length, a visual music of vertical and diagonal lines that the eye follows without effort, without thought. The tilt gives them character, gives them the appearance of having settled into their places naturally, the way stones settle in a riverbed, the way leaves come to rest after falling, and there is something deeply satisfying about their imperfection, their refusal to stand in rigid formation, their acceptance of gravity and time and the gentle chaos that comes with being used, being loved, being part of something living rather than preserved. A moonbeam cuts through heavy drapes, finding the one small gap where fabric does not quite meet, where the weight of velvet has pulled just slightly away from the window's edge, and through that narrow opening the moon sends its light in a single clear shaft that falls across the room like a blessing, like a reminder that beyond these walls the night continues, vast and cold and beautiful. The beam illuminates everything it touches with silver clarity, making dust visible, making wood grains stand out in sharp relief, and where it falls it creates a path of light that seems almost solid, almost something that could be walked upon, and the drapes themselves, heavy, layered, deep burgundy or midnight blue, frame this intrusion of the outside world with theatrical grandeur, as though the moon were a performer and the library its stage, and this moment, this quiet passage of light through darkness were the only scene that matters. Polished wood grain flows across the surface of a study desk, each line a record of years of growth, each swirl and not a story written in the language of trees, of seasons past, of rings that accumulated in darkness beneath bark and soil before becoming this. A surface smooth and cool to the touch, reflecting light in subtle waves that follow the grain's natural direction. The polish has deepened the wood's color, brought out tones of amber and rust and honey, and running eyes along these patterns is like following rivers from above, like tracing paths through landscapes that exist in miniature, compressed into 2 dimensions but suggesting infinite depth. The desk is solid, immovable, a foundation upon which thought can rest, upon which hands can lay open books and spread papers and simply exist in the act of reading, of contemplating, of allowing time to pass without marking its passage. Rain patters against leaded glass, each drop striking with its own small voice, creating a symphony of tiny percussion that blends into a continuous whisper, a gentle static that fills the spaces between silence. The leaded glass divides the window into small diamond or rectangular panes, each one held in place by strips of lead that have oxidized to soft gray, and the rain traces down each section independently, following the channels where glass meets metal, pooling briefly in the joins before continuing downward. The sound is constant but never monotonous, rising and falling with the wind's intensity, with the storm's mood, and it wraps around the library like a blanket of white noise, a cocoon of weather that makes the interior feel even more protected, even more removed from the world's demands and urgencies. A dim lantern hangs from a ceiling beam, suspended by a chain of dark iron that disappears into shadow above, and the lantern itself is made of glass panels set in a metal frame, its interior holding a light source that flickers occasionally, that dims and brightens as though breathing. The lantern casts circles of soft illumination downward and outward, creating overlapping pools of visibility that fade at their edges into deeper darkness, and it sways almost imperceptibly, moved by air currents too subtle to feel but present nonetheless. And this gentle motion causes the light to shift across surfaces below, to animate shadows, to make the room feel as though it possesses a heartbeat, a rhythm, a life that extends beyond the inanimate objects it contains. A plush footstool sits beside a wingback chair, upholstered in fabric that matches the chair's own covering. Perhaps a deep green velvet or a burgundy brocade worn soft with use. And it waits there at precisely the right distance, the right angle, ready to receive tired feet, to elevate legs and improve circulation, to add one more layer of comfort to an already comfortable arrangement. The footstool is short and wide, stable and inviting, and its presence suggests care, suggests that whoever arranged this space understood the needs of the body as well as the needs of the mind, understood that true rest requires attention to every detail, every small adjustment that allows muscles to release, allows breathing to deepen, allows the boundary between waking and sleeping to become something permeable, something easy to cross. Shadows of bookshelves stretch long across walls and floor, cast by the various light sources scattered throughout the space, and these shadows are not simply dark. They are layered, textured, filled with gradations from charcoal to pale gray, and they contain within them the shapes of individual books, the vertical lines of shelf edges, the diagonal thrust of the leaning ladder. The shadows grow longer as lights dim or as their sources move, and they create a secondary architecture within the room, a structure made of absence rather than presence. And watching them is like watching time made visible, made manifest in the way darkness claims territory and then surrenders it, the way light and shadow negotiate their endless dance across every surface they encounter. Warm amber light radiates from a table fixture, its shade made of glass in shades of caramel and gold, its base solid and weighted to prevent tipping, and the light it produces is filtered through this colored glass, transformed into something warmer than white, something closer to candlelight or firelight, something that speaks to ancient human needs for warmth and safety in the dark. The fixture sits on a side table, its cord trailing down and away toward some unseen outlet, and the glow it creates is contained, intimate, meant for reading or close work rather than illuminating the entire space, and it serves as an anchor point, a small sun around which other elements orbit, drawing the eye and the body toward its promise of warmth, toward its suggestion that here, in this small sphere of influence, everything is well, everything is as it should be. Curved ladder rungs rise in gentle increments, each one fashioned from polished oak that has been shaped to fit the hand, to provide secure grip without sharp edges or uncomfortable angles, and the rungs are spaced with perfect regularity, creating a rhythm as they ascend toward the higher shelves, toward the books that rest in semi-darkness above. The oak has aged to a warm golden brown, its surface smooth from decades of use, from countless trips up and down in search of volumes stored out of easy reach, and the ladder itself is a beautiful object independent of its function. Its sides curve slightly outward at the base for stability, then taper as they rise, and the whole structure possesses an elegance, a gracefulness that speaks to a time when even utilitarian objects were crafted with care, with attention to beauty as well as purpose. A silk bookmark drapes over the edge of a tome, its fabric lustrous even in low light, its color a deep wine red or perhaps a royal blue that has faded slightly with exposure and time. The bookmark is embroidered along one edge with a simple pattern, geometric shapes or stylized flowers, and it falls in soft folds from where it marks a place somewhere in the book's middle pages, its weight just enough to keep it from sliding free, its presence a reminder that someone has been here before, has read this far, has chosen this spot to pause, to close the covers and step away with the intention of returning. The silk catches light differently than the leather and paper around it, creates a small accent of luxury, of deliberate beauty, and it moves slightly when air passes by, fluttering like a tiny banner, like a flag claiming territory in the landscape of knowledge and story. The night sky is framed by mullioned windows, the glass divided into smaller panes by thin strips of wood that cross horizontally and vertically, creating a grid through which stars can be glimpsed between clouds, through which the moon's passage can be tracked as it arcs across the heavens. The mullions cast their own small shadows on the glass, create a geometry that organizes the view, that turns the wild expanse of space into something more manageable, more architectural. And looking out through these windows is like looking at the night through a lens, through a filter that makes it feel both closer and more distant, both more accessible and more mysterious. The glass itself is old, slightly wavy, causing stars to shimmer and shift, causing the moon to stretch and distort at the edges of panes, and this imperfection adds charm, adds character, adds a sense that the windows have witnessed countless nights just like this one, that they will witness countless more. Dust settles on forgotten volumes, accumulating in the small spaces between books, on the tops of leather spines, on horizontal surfaces that no hand has disturbed in weeks or months or longer, and the dust is fine and pale, visible only when light catches it at certain angles, when shadows reveal its presence as a soft gray film that mutes colors, that softens edges, that marks the passage of time in its own quiet way. The forgotten volumes stand patient beneath their layer of dust, their stories intact, their pages waiting, and there is something peaceful about their abandonment, something restful about the way they have been allowed to simply exist without the pressure of being read, without the expectation of being useful, allowed instead to contribute their weight and presence to the library's atmosphere, to serve as foundation and backdrop for those books that are chosen, that are opened, that are brought down from shelves and into light and relationship with human eyes and minds. A cozy nook reveals itself in one corner, fitted with a tufted ottoman that sits low to the ground, its surface buttoned in regular intervals creating small depressions and rises that form a quilted landscape of fabric and padding. The ottoman is upholstered in material that has absorbed years of contact, becoming softer, more yielding, more perfectly shaped to receive the weight of weary legs or the curve of someone sitting cross-legged with a book balanced on their knees. The tufting creates gentle shadows within its own surface, tiny valleys where light does not quite reach, and the whole piece radiates an invitation to settle, to fold oneself into this protected space and let the walls and shelves create a boundary between the self and the vastness of everything beyond, to make the world small enough to hold in one's attention, small enough to comprehend without effort or strain. A lamp cord lies coiled neatly on the floor beside its fixture, the excess length wound in careful loops that sit one atop another, creating a small cylinder of black or brown rubber-coated wire that speaks to someone's attention to detail, to their desire for order even in small things that might go unnoticed. The cord emerges from the base of the lamp, travels downward, and then spirals into this tidy coil before extending away toward the wall, and the precision of the winding suggests care, suggests a mind that finds peace in organization, in the small acts of making spaces tidy and intentional. And even this humble detail adds to the room's overall sense of being tended, of being loved, of being a place where nothing is too minor to deserve consideration and gentle arrangement. Through rain-streaked windows a view emerges of a dark garden beyond, visible only as shapes and suggestions, the mass of shrubs, the vertical lines of tree trunks, the horizontal spread of hedges, all rendered in shades of black and deepest green, all made mysterious by distance and darkness and the water that runs down the glass in constant streams. The rain distorts everything, turns the garden into something abstract, something impressionistic, and watching it is like watching a painting that continuously remakes itself, that never settles into a final composition but instead flows and shifts with each new rivulet, each new gathering of droplets that merge and slide and catch whatever faint light escapes from the library's interior, and the garden becomes less a real place and more a dream of nature, a soft, dark presence that exists just beyond reach, just beyond the boundary of shelter and warmth. A velvet curtain brushes against the windowsill with each small movement of air, its heavy fabric swaying almost imperceptibly, its lower edge making the softest whisper of contact against painted wood. The velvet is rich and deep in color, its pile thick enough to trap light and shadow in equal measure, and where it touches the sill it leaves the faintest mark, a darkening of dust that shows the pattern of its movement, the rhythm of its touching and withdrawing. The curtain hangs from rings that slide on a rod above, and its weight pulls it into natural folds that create vertical channels of deeper shadow alternating with surfaces that catch and hold whatever illumination reaches them. And this interplay of light and dark within the fabric itself creates a texture that the eye wants to follow, wants to trace from floor to ceiling and back again, finding comfort in the repetition, in the predictability of pattern. An open book rests on a lectern, its pages spread wide and held in place by the angle of the reading surface, its paper catching light from above and reflecting it back in a soft glow that makes the text clearly visible without strain or effort. The lectern itself is carved from dark wood, its columns solid and stable, its top angled at precisely the right degree to make reading comfortable while standing or sitting on a tall stool nearby, and the book that rests there is large, perhaps an atlas or an illustrated volume, its pages thick and textured, its margins wide, and it sits open to a place somewhere past the beginning but well before the end, waiting for eyes to return and continue their journey through whatever knowledge or story it contains. The lectern stands as a point of focus, a declaration that here reading is not casual but ceremonial, not hurried but deliberate, and the book's openness suggests both vulnerability and generosity, a willingness to be read, to share what it holds. Soft shadows pool beneath the hanging lantern, gathering in the space directly below where light cannot reach, creating a column of relative darkness that grounds the fixture to the floor below, that connects illumination to its source in a visible line of cause and effect. These shadows are not harsh or threatening but gentle, graduated, fading at their edges into the ambient light that fills the rest of the room, and they shift subtly as the lantern sways on its chain, as the light source within flickers and adjusts, creating a living quality, a sense of breath and movement that prevents the space from feeling static or frozen, that keeps it feeling inhabited even in the absence of any visible person, any audible voice. A woven basket sits against one wall, holding loose pages that have been gathered and saved. Perhaps letters, perhaps manuscript sheets, perhaps pages that have come loose from their bindings and await repair or filing. The basket is made of dried reeds or willow, its weave tight and regular, its handle arched and smooth from use, and the pages within are visible as a jumble of white and cream, some folded, some flat, some bearing lines of handwriting in ink that has faded from black to brown with age. The basket serves as a temporary home for these orphan sheets, a place of transition between being lost and being found, between disorder and organization, and its presence suggests that even in a space as seemingly timeless as this library, there are ongoing processes, ongoing acts of care and preservation, ongoing relationships between present and past that require attention and tender handling. Moonlit dust coats a marble mantle, the particles so fine they create a veil across the stone's polished surface, softening its cold perfection, adding a layer of impermanence to something meant to last forever. The mantle stretches above what might be a fireplace now cold and empty, its marble gray or white or veined with colors that twist through the stone like frozen rivers, and the moonlight that falls upon it comes through windows at an angle that illuminates the dust, makes it visible, makes it shimmer slightly as though the surface itself were breathing. The mantle holds objects in careful arrangement, perhaps a clock, perhaps small sculptures or framed images, but the dust unites them all, claims them all as part of the same slow accumulation of time, the same gentle decline that affects everything, that softens every edge, that reminds us that even stone and metal must eventually yield to the patient work of air and moisture and the endless procession of days. The latter's shadow falls across book spines on the opposite wall, its outline sharp where light is strong and diffuse where illumination fades, creating a diagonal line that cuts across the vertical organization of the shelves. that imposes its own geometry on their careful arrangement. The shadow includes the ladder's side rails, the regular intervals of its rungs, even the small hooks or caps at its top where it meets the shelf's edge, and this shadow moves throughout the night as light sources shift or as the moon travels across the sky outside, creating a slow animation, a sundial in reverse that marks time not with the sun's position but with the moon's passage and the flickering of lamps and candles. The shadow across the spines makes them momentarily illegible, turns titles into mysteries, transforms known objects into abstract shapes, and there is something playful about this transformation, something that reminds us that even in a place of knowledge and certainty, shadow can claim territory, can create ambiguity, can make the familiar strange. Warm light falls upon a brass reading rod, a slender implement designed to rest across an open book's pages, to hold them flat, to prevent them from closing under their own weight, and the brass catches the light and returns it in a concentrated gleam, a line of brilliance that draws the eye and holds it. The rod is simple in design, a straight bar with small finials at each end, perhaps decorated with minimal engraving or left plain, and it lies across pages that remain otherwise unseen, serving its function without fanfare, without demanding attention beyond the beauty of its material and the purposefulness of its form. The warmth of the light makes the brass seem to glow from within, makes it feel less like metal and more like captured sunlight. And in this transformation it becomes more than a tool, becomes instead a small perfect thing that exists at the intersection of utility and beauty, reminding us that objects made with care can serve both practical needs and aesthetic ones, can function while also bringing pleasure simply through their presence. A quiet corner holds a potted fern, its fronds spreading outward in delicate layers of green that cascade over the pot's rim and reach toward whatever light they can find. The fern sits on a small stand or perhaps directly on the floor, its presence bringing something living into the space of preserved and bound knowledge, something that grows and breathes and changes with each passing day even as the books around it remain fixed in their contents, static in their forms. The fronds are composed of countless small leaflets arranged along central stems, creating patterns that repeat with fractal complexity, and they move slightly with air currents, swaying in subtle rhythms that are almost hypnotic to watch, that draw attention inward and downward into contemplation of their structure, their resilience, their quiet insistence on life even in dim conditions where sunshine is rare and shadows predominate. Raindrops bead on outer panes, each one holding its spherical shape for a moment before gravity pulls it into motion, before it merges with others or slides down the glass in a quicksilver trail. The beating occurs where the glass is coldest, where temperature difference causes condensation, and the drops catch light from inside the library, from the lamps and lanterns and candles, transforming each small sphere into a lens, into a prism that refracts and reflects, that turns illumination into something prismatic and alive. The outer panes are harder to see clearly, separated from the interior by the leaded glass closer at hand, but the rain upon them is visible as movement, as constant change, as a veil between interior warmth and exterior cold that reminds us of boundaries, of thresholds, of the miracle of shelter and the simple profound gift of being inside while weather happens outside. A faded map is pinned to a corkboard, its paper yellowed and soft at the edges where it has been handled, where it has been rolled and unrolled, where time and light have done their slow work of transformation. The map shows coastlines and rivers, mountains rendered as small repeated symbols, cities marked with dots and names that may no longer match current geography, current political divisions, and the colors that once marked different territories have faded to pastels, to ghosts of their former intensity. The pins that hold it are brass or steel with round heads, pushed through the map's corners into the cork beneath, and the cork itself is old, its surface pocked with hundreds of small holes from previous pins, previous maps, previous arrangements, creating a history of what has been displayed here, what has been studied, what has been deemed worthy of prominent placement where eyes might fall upon it during moments of rest or distraction. A thick glass inkwell sits on a desk blotter, its weight substantial, its purpose clear even if it has not been used in years, in decades perhaps. The glass is cut or molded with facets that catch light and break it into components, creating small rainbows that dance across nearby surfaces when illumination strikes at the right angle. And the inkwell's opening is wide enough to accept a pen nib, its interior stained with the residue of ink long dried, creating patterns of black and blue and sepia that have become part of the glass itself, impossible to clean, transforming the vessel into something that bears witness to all the words it has helped bring into existence. The desk blotter beneath is made of leather or heavy paper, its surface marked with ink stains, with impressions from writing done with pressure, with the accumulated evidence of correspondence and notation and the careful recording of thoughts that needed to be preserved, that needed to be given physical form so they would not be lost to the imperfect machinery of memory. Shelves sag gently under the weight they have borne for years, the wood bending in subtle curves that follow the distribution of mass, that respond to gravity's patient insistence. The sagging is not dramatic, not alarming, but visible when one looks carefully, when one traces the line of a shelf from end to end and sees that it dips in the middle where books are most heavily concentrated, where the weight is greatest and the wood's resistance has slowly yielded. This deformation speaks to age, to endurance, to the shelf's willingness to continue serving its purpose even as it changes shape. And there is something touching about this evidence of strain, something that humanizes the furniture, that makes it seem less like an object and more like a partner in the long work of holding knowledge, of keeping books accessible, of maintaining organization against the entropy that would scatter everything into chaos if given the opportunity. A glow emanates from a shaded sconce mounted on the wall, its fixture made of metal that has aged to a dark patina, its shade perhaps made of glass or fabric that filters and softens the light before releasing it into the room. The sconce is positioned at a height that illuminates without blinding, that casts light both upward toward the ceiling and downward toward the floor, creating overlapping zones of visibility that help define the space, that give it depth and dimension. The light from the sconce is warm and steady, contributing its share to the overall illumination without dominating, without demanding primacy, and it creates a small aura on the wall around itself, a circle of brightness that fades gradually into shadow, and within this gradient the wall's texture becomes visible. The slight roughness of plaster, the faint pattern of wallpaper, the small imperfections that give surfaces character and make them feel real, lived in, marked by time and presence. A wooden chair stands with its cushioned seat ready to receive weight, positioned near a table or desk at an angle that suggests it has been recently occupied or will be soon, that it exists in relationship to the work surface nearby rather than in isolation. The chair's wood is dark and solid, its construction traditional with vertical slats in the back, with legs that splay slightly outward for stability, with arms perhaps or perhaps not depending on its specific design, and the cushion that rests on its seat is tied in place with ribbons or simply held by friction, upholstered in fabric that complements the room's overall palette, perhaps a deep green or burgundy or gold that has mellowed with age. The cushion is compressed in the center where bodies have sat most often, creating a depression that makes sitting even more comfortable, that cradles the weight and distributes it, and the chair as a whole radiates an invitation, a promise of support and rest, of being able to settle and remain settled for as long as needed without discomfort or the nagging urge to stand and move and seek relief elsewhere. Night fog presses against the glass from outside, visible as a pale opacity that diffuses the darkness, that makes the boundary between interior and exterior less distinct, more permeable, more like a transition than a barrier. The fog moves in slow currents, sometimes thinning to reveal suggestions of what lies beyond, the shapes of trees, the line of a path, the bulk of other buildings, and sometimes thickening to obscure everything, to reduce the world to this one room, this one collection of light and shadow and carefully arranged objects. The glass becomes a screen onto which the fog projects its presence, and the moisture in the air creates small droplets that cling to the outer surface, that merge and slide and leave trails like silver tracks, like the paths of small creatures moving across a dark landscape, and watching this slow performance of water and air and temperature is meditative, is calming, is a reminder that the world outside continues its processes regardless of human attention or concern. A leather-bound atlas rests on a lower shelf, its spine thick with the accumulated pages of maps and geographical information, its covers embossed with designs that have been worn smooth in places where hands have gripped most frequently. The atlas is large and heavy, meant to be taken down and spread open on a table rather than held in the lap, meant for extended study rather than casual browsing, and its position on the lower shelf makes it accessible without requiring a ladder, places it within easy reach of anyone who might need to consult its contents, to trace routes, to measure distances, to understand spatial relationships between places separated by oceans and mountains and vast stretches of land. The leather has darkened with age, has developed a sheen from being handled, and the pages within are thick and substantial, able to withstand the repeated opening and closing, the turning and returning that comes with reference works that are valued and used rather than simply preserved and displayed. A lamp reflector casts even light downward and outward, its curved metal surface polished or painted white to maximize the amount of illumination it redirects, to ensure that the bulb or flame at its center produces useful visibility rather than allowing light to escape in all directions without purpose. The reflector creates a pool of brightness that is consistent in intensity, that does not have a bright center and dim edges, but instead distributes luminosity evenly across its span, making it ideal for reading, for detailed work, for any task that requires sustained visual attention without strain or fatigue. The lamp itself sits on a surface or stands on a base, and the reflector is adjustable perhaps, able to be angled to direct light precisely where it is needed. And this combination of functionality and thoughtful design makes it more than simply a light source, makes it instead a tool that has been refined over time, that represents accumulated understanding about human needs and the ways in which environments can be shaped to meet those needs with grace and efficiency. Still air fills the high-ceilinged hall, air that has settled into itself, that has stopped moving, that holds the warmth from lamps and the coolness from windows in perfect suspension without mixing them, creating layers of temperature that shift only when a door opens somewhere distant or when a body passes through and disturbs the equilibrium. The ceiling rises far overhead, disappearing into shadows that no light fully penetrates, and this height creates a sense of volume, of space that extends upward as well as outward, of architecture that acknowledges the vertical dimension as worthy of attention and celebration. The stillness of the air makes every small sound more noticeable, makes breathing audible, makes the creak of wood and the settling of stone into events rather than background noise, and this acoustic clarity adds to the sense of being held within something larger than oneself, something that has its own presence and dignity that commands respect through sheer scale and quiet endurance. Rain trails down an arched window, following the curve of glass that rises to a point at the top, creating patterns of water that conform to the window's geometry, that gather along the curved edges where glass meets frame, that run in rivulets that accelerate and slow depending on the surface tension, on the angle of contact, on the intersection with other streams. The arch gives the window a formal quality, a sense of having been designed with care for both function and beauty, and the rain's movement across this shaped surface becomes a performance, becomes something worth watching as the water negotiates the curves, as it finds paths of least resistance, as it creates temporary sculptures of liquid and light that exist for moments before dissolving into new configurations, new arrangements that are equally fleeting, equally beautiful in their impermanence. A cozy table sits in a protected alcove or corner, fitted with a lamp whose shade is fringed with tassels or beaded trim that hangs around the shade's lower edge, moving slightly with air movement, catching light and creating small sparkles, small points of brightness that dance and shift. The table itself is small and intimate, sized for one person to work comfortably or for two to sit close together in companionable proximity, and its surface is clear except for the lamp and perhaps one or two other objects. A book currently being read, a pair of spectacles folded and waiting, a small dish for holding paper clips or other minor necessities. The fringed shade filters the light, softens it, gives it a warm vintage quality that speaks to earlier times, to decorative sensibilities that valued ornamentation alongside utility, and the fringe adds movement to what would otherwise be a static object, creates a border that is alive with subtle animation, that makes the lamp feel less like furniture and more like a companion, a presence that keeps watch through the long, quiet hours. Books are stacked in a pyramid on the floor, balanced carefully with larger volumes forming the base and progressively smaller ones rising toward the apex, creating a structure that is temporary but stable, that represents perhaps a sorting in progress, a classification system being developed, or simply a moment of overflow when shelf space was insufficient and this vertical solution presented itself. The pyramid sits against a wall or in a corner where it will not be disturbed, where passers-by will not accidentally knock it over, and the spines face outward in various directions, creating a patchwork of colors and textures and text, some leather, some cloth, some paper that has been reinforced with boards, and this casual accumulation has its own aesthetic appeal, its own logic that may not be immediately apparent but that makes sense to whoever created it, whoever decided that these particular books belong together in this particular arrangement, at least for now, at least until some future reorganization returns them to their proper places on proper shelves where they will wait in proper order. Moonlight falls upon a silver letter opener, transforming the implement into something luminous, something that seems to emit rather than reflect light, its blade catching the moon's cool illumination and holding it, concentrating it into a line of brilliance that stands out against the darker surface on which it rests. The letter opener is simple in design, a handle that widens for grip, a blade that tapers to a point suitable for sliding under envelope flaps and slicing through paper without tearing. And the silver has developed a patina over time, a slight tarnish that gives it character, that proves its age and use, but where the moonlight strikes, the metal seems renewed, seems almost new again, polished by light rather than by cloth and polish. The opener lies at an angle across a desk or table, perhaps atop a stack of correspondence that awaits attention, perhaps alone and purposeless for the moment, and its presence suggests communication, suggests the exchange of written words across distances, suggests that even in this library devoted to bound volumes and printed pages, there is room for the personal, the handwritten, the sealed message that requires this particular tool to reveal its contents. A plush throw is draped over a chair arm, its fabric soft and inviting, perhaps wool or velvet or some blend that combines warmth with weight, that falls in natural folds determined by gravity and the flexibility of the material itself. The throw is positioned as though someone has just set it aside after using it, or as though it waits ready to be pulled into a lap when the air grows cooler, when the distance from the nearest lamp makes itself felt as a chill that penetrates even the layers of clothing, when comfort requires this additional layer, this portable source of warmth that can be gathered and wrapped and adjusted as needed. The colors are muted, harmonizing with the room's overall palette, and the edges might be finished with fringe or binding or simply hemmed, and where the throw touches the chair arm it creates texture against texture, softness against the chair's own upholstery. And this small detail adds another layer of visual and tactile interest, another element that makes the space feel lived in, used, loved. Shadow play dances across walls and ceiling from a pendant fixture that hangs suspended on a chain or cord, its shade perhaps made of pierced metal or cut glass that allows light to escape through specific patterns, creating projected designs that shift and move as the fixture sways almost imperceptibly on its suspension. The shadows created are geometric or organic depending on the shade's design. Stars, leaves, abstract patterns that repeat and overlap, and they transform flat surfaces into fields of visual complexity, into canvases that display ever-changing art made from nothing more than light and obstruction, presence and absence. The movement is so subtle that it is almost subliminal, noticed only when one stops and watches, when attention focuses on these peripheral effects rather than on the central cone of illumination. And this discovery feels like finding a secret, like noticing something that has been happening all along but that required stillness and receptivity to perceive, to appreciate, to understand as part of the room's larger orchestration of effects and moods. A worn step stool stands by the bottom shelf, its surface scuffed and scratched from years of use, its legs slightly uneven from the way it has been set down thousands of times on floors that are not perfectly level, from the weight it has borne as people stood upon it to reach items just beyond the grasp of extended arms. The stool is wooden and solid, made in an era when such things were built to last rather than to be replaced, and it folds perhaps for storage or remains rigid depending on its design, and its position by the bottom shelf suggests it is used not for reaching high places but for sitting low, for examining volumes stored near the floor, for working at a level that would be uncomfortable without this small platform that raises one just enough to make extended periods of crouching or kneeling unnecessary. The wood has darkened where hands have gripped most often, has absorbed oils and moisture and the accumulated contact of human skin. And these marks of use do not diminish its value but rather increase it, transform it from object into artifact, into something that carries within its form the evidence of all the service it has provided. Gentle glow suffuses a varnished banister, the wood's finish catching and holding light, creating a surface that seems to have depth, that seems to contain illumination within its layers of transparent coating. The banister runs alongside stairs or perhaps defines the edge of a raised area, a mezzanine level from which the main library floor can be viewed, and its wood is shaped and smoothed, comfortable to grip, solid under the palm, and the varnish has been applied with care, building up in thin coats that enhance the wood's natural grain without obscuring it, that protect without concealing. The glow that rests upon it comes from nearby lamps or from moonlight through windows, and it travels along the banister's length, following curves and angles, highlighting the points where the wood swells slightly for decorative effect or where supports join the main rail, and running eyes along this illuminated path is like following a river of light through the darker landscape of the room, a guide, a reference point, something solid and reliable in a space where so much is given over to shadow and suggestion. Rain shadows ripple on the ceiling, cast there by water running down windows, by the way exterior light, whether from moon or distant street lamps, passes through the moving water and is refracted, projected upward and inward to create this unexpected display. The shadows flow and merge, creating patterns that resemble waves on water seen from below, or the dappled light under trees when wind moves leaves, and they animate the ceiling in ways that transform it from a flat plane into something dynamic, something that participates in the room's life rather than simply capping it from above. The ripples move at the speed of rain, which is to say slowly, gently, with a rhythm that has no regularity, no predictable pattern, only the constant variation that comes from natural processes, from phenomena that follow physical laws but that create infinite variations within those constraints. And watching these shadows move overhead is hypnotic, is soothing, is a form of meditation that requires no effort, no discipline, only the willingness to look up, to notice, to allow the movement to carry attention away from the thinking mind and into the observing awareness that asks nothing, needs nothing, simply witnesses what is. A nook alcove emerges from the wall, fitted with a built-in bench whose seat is padded and whose back is formed by the wall itself, creating a space that is both part of the larger room and separate from it, protected by its own architectural boundaries, its own sense of enclosure and intimacy. The bench runs the width of the alcove, perhaps with cushions added for additional comfort, perhaps with pillows propped in corners where someone might lean while reading or simply resting, and the alcove ceiling is lower than the main rooms, creating a sense of being sheltered, of being held, of occupying a space that has been carved out specifically for the human scale, for the need to sometimes make the world smaller, more manageable, more like a nest or a cave where one can retreat, without truly leaving. The walls of the alcove might hold small shelves for books within arm's reach, might have a lamp mounted for reading, might simply be bare and painted in a color that harmonizes with the rest of the library, and sitting in this space would feel like being embraced by architecture, like being given permission to withdraw from the demands of openness and exposure into something more contained, more protective, more fundamentally comforting. Dust motes swim through the lantern beam, made visible by the light's passage through air that is never quite empty, never quite still, and they drift in chaotic patterns that have no pattern, rising on thermals too subtle to feel, falling under gravity's pull, moving sideways on currents created by the lantern's warmth or by distant openings and closings of doors. The motes are tiny, smaller than grains of sand, composed of fiber and skin and the decomposed remnants of paper and fabric and all the organic materials that share this space, and they catch the light for only moments as they pass through the beam, becoming visible as tiny stars, as pinpoints of brightness that exist for an instant before disappearing back into darkness, and tracking individual motes is impossible. They are too small, too numerous, too random in their movements, but watching the overall effect is mesmerizing, is a reminder that the air itself is not empty space but substance, is filled with matter and movement, is alive in its own way with processes that continue regardless of whether anyone observes them. An open window reveals the starry night beyond, the glass having been raised or swung outward to allow air to enter, to create connection between interior and exterior, to permit the library's atmosphere to mingle with the world's larger atmosphere in slow exchange. Through the opening the stars are visible, scattered across the darkness in their ancient patterns, some bright and some dim, some alone and some clustered in formations that humans have named and told stories about for millennia. And the night sky in its vastness provides perspective, provides scale, reminds us that this library, this room, this moment exists within a context so large that it cannot be fully comprehended, only felt, only acknowledged with a mixture of awe and humility. The air that enters through the open window carries with it coolness and moisture, carries scents from outside, grass, earth, rain, the particular smell of night that is different from day, and it moves through the library changing everything slightly, causing flames to flicker, causing pages to flutter, causing the temperature to drop by small degrees that make the warmth from lamps more precious, more necessary, more appreciated. A brass clock ticks on a side table, its mechanism marking time with small precise sounds that occur at regular intervals, creating a rhythm that becomes part of the room's soundscape, that adds its voice to the rain and the settling wood and the other small noises that fill what might otherwise be called silence. The clock is mechanical, powered by springs or weights that must be wound periodically, and its face shows hours and minutes with hands that move in their eternal circle. And perhaps there is a second hand as well, sweeping smoothly or ticking forward in discrete jumps depending on the mechanism's design. The brass case has been polished or has developed a natural patina, and it reflects nearby light in warm tones. And the clock's presence serves not just the practical function of showing time but also the symbolic function of acknowledging time's passage, of making visible something that would otherwise be abstract, of giving physical form to the invisible current that carries everyone forward from past through present into future, and the ticking, steady, reliable, unchanging, becomes a kind of comfort, a proof that some things continue regardless of circumstances, regardless of mood or weather or the larger chaos of the world. Shelves curve into a dim recess, following the wall's architecture as it turns and creates spaces that are not quite rooms and not quite hallways but something in between, transitional zones where light does not fully penetrate, where shadows gather more densely, where books rest in semi-obscurity waiting for someone to venture into these less traveled regions to discover them. The curve of the shelves is gentle, following the wall's radius, and the books on these curved sections must be arranged carefully to prevent them from falling, to ensure they remain stable despite the angle at which they rest. And this creates visual interest, creates lines that sweep and flow rather than marching in rigid horizontals. And following these curves with the eye is like following a path that leads deeper into the library's mysteries, deeper into its accumulated knowledge, deeper into regions where fewer people go and where the books have waited longer to be chosen, to be opened, to share what they contain. Warm light edges the edges of books where they protrude slightly from shelves, catching the corners and ends of volumes that have been pushed or pulled just enough to break the plane of perfect alignment. And this edge lighting creates small lines of brightness that outline each book's form, that separate it visually from its neighbors, that give depth and dimension to what might otherwise be a flat wall of spines. The light comes from lamps positioned to illuminate shelves, and where it strikes at acute angles it creates these highlighting effects, these moments where books seem to glow at their boundaries, and this accidental artistry, unplanned but beautiful, adds another layer of visual complexity to the room, another reason to let the eyes wander, to discover small perfect details that reward attention, that make the space feel rich with subtlety, dense with things worth noticing if one takes the time to look carefully, to observe with intention rather than simply scanning for obvious features. A velvet rope stretches across the entrance to a back hall, its ends attached to brass stanchions that stand like sentinels marking a boundary, suggesting that what lies beyond is not for general access, not for casual wandering, but rather reserved for those with specific purpose or permission. The rope hangs in a gentle catenary curve between its anchor points, and its velvet surface is soft and rich, colored perhaps in deep red or royal blue, and it communicates restriction with elegance rather than harshness, with a suggestion of special significance rather than simple prohibition. The rope does not prevent anyone from passing if they choose. It can be unhooked or simply stepped over, but it serves as a psychological barrier, as a signal that the spaces beyond are different, are separate, are marked as distinct from the public areas of the library, and it adds an element of mystery, an element of curiosity about what might lie in those restricted regions, what treasures or dangers or simply mundane storage might be found past this soft velvet boundary. Moon glow rests upon a polished brass knocker mounted on a door, the metal shaped perhaps as a ring held in the mouth of a lion or simply as a plain sphere or bar, and the polish catches moonlight coming through windows and concentrates it, turns the knocker into a small beacon, a point of brightness in the surrounding dimness. The brass has been maintained, has been cleaned and buffed so that it achieves maximum reflectivity, and the glow it holds is cool and silvery, transformed by the moon's light from the warm gold that brass shows in lamplight to something more spectral, more ethereal, more mysterious. The door itself is closed, whether locked or simply shut is unclear, and the knocker suggests the possibility of passage, of transition from this space to another, of movement between realms, but for now it simply exists as a destination, as a point of focus that draws attention and then refuses to resolve the questions it raises about what might lie beyond. Rain pools on a stone sill outside the window, gathering in the slight depression that years of weather have worn into the stone, collecting until surface tension can no longer hold it, and it spills over the edge in small waterfalls that fall to whatever lies below. The stone is dark and wet, its surface revealing textures and colors that are invisible when dry, showing the grain of the rock, the small fossils or crystals or impurities that were incorporated when the stone was formed millions of years ago, and the pooled water reflects the night sky, reflects the library's interior lights, creates small mirrors that show inverted versions of the world, distorted and partial but recognizable, and the pool trembles with each new drop that falls into it, sending ripples across its surface that intersect and interfere and create patterns of movement that are mathematical in their precision yet appear random and chaotic to the observing eye. Ladder wheels roll on an oiled track mounted along the front edge of shelves, allowing the ladder to move smoothly from section to section with minimal effort, with a slight push that sets it gliding along its rail, and the track is dark with oil that prevents rust, that reduces friction, that makes the whole system nearly silent in operation except for the small sound of metal rolling on metal, a quiet rumble that speaks of engineering, of mechanical advantage, of human ingenuity applied to the problem of accessing high places without requiring separate ladders for each section of shelving. The wheels are small and solid, perhaps made of brass or iron, and they fit precisely into the track's groove, unable to leave it, constrained to follow the path that has been laid for them, and the ladder itself hangs from these wheels, balanced and stable, ready to be moved wherever it is needed, ready to provide access to the upper reaches where the oldest or least frequently consulted volumes wait in patient darkness for someone to climb up and bring them down into light, into relevance, into the possibility of being read once again. A soft lamp sits on a wheeled cart, the kind of cart that can be moved from place to place as needed, rolled silently across floors to wherever additional light is required, or where someone has chosen to settle for an extended period of reading or study. The cart is small and practical, its wheels probably rubber or felt padded to prevent scratching floors and to minimize noise, and its surface holds the lamp securely along with perhaps a few other items. A book currently in progress, a notepad for recording thoughts, a pencil or pen waiting to be picked up. The lamp itself glows gently, its shade directing light downward in a focused cone that creates a portable pool of visibility, and the whole arrangement speaks to flexibility, to the ability to customize the space according to momentary needs, to bring comfort and illumination exactly where they are wanted, rather than being constrained by fixed positions, fixed arrangements that cannot adapt to changing circumstances or preferences. A corner shelf holds slim volumes, books that are narrower than most, perhaps poetry collections or novellas or specialized texts that require fewer pages to contain their contents. And these slim spines stand together creating vertical lines that are more delicate than the thick tomes nearby, more refined, more easily overlooked but no less valuable for their modest dimensions. The corner location means this shelf receives less attention than those positioned in more prominent places, and the books here have a quality of being discovered rather than immediately noticed, of rewarding the careful observer who takes time to scan every section, every nook, every place where knowledge might be stored. The slim volumes lean slightly against one another, their narrow forms requiring mutual support, creating angles and relationships that shift if one is removed, that reorganize themselves into new configurations, and their presence adds variety to the library's collection. Reminds us that significance is not determined by size, that some of the most potent ideas arrive in compact forms that can be held easily in one hand, that slip into pockets or bags, that travel with us in ways that larger books cannot. Night breeze stirs a sheer curtain, the fabric so light and fine that even the gentlest movement of air is enough to set it drifting, to make it billow inward or press against the window frame, creating slow undulations that are beautiful to watch, that hypnotize with their randomness and grace. The curtain is translucent, allowing moonlight and starlight to pass through while softening it, diffusing it, turning the night's illumination into something dreamlike and hazy, and the fabric itself might be white or cream or the palest blue, colors that work with light rather than against it, that enhance rather than block. The breeze that moves the curtain carries with it the night's coolness and whatever scents exist in the air outside. Rain and earth and growing things. And watching the curtain's movement is like watching breathing, like observing the library itself inhale and exhale, take in the outside world and release its own warmed air in exchange, participating in the larger circulation of atmosphere that connects all spaces, all places, all moments into one continuous fluid system. A leather portfolio leans against the wall, its form rectangular and flat, designed to hold papers and documents without folding them, to protect drawings or maps or certificates from damage, and it rests at an angle determined by gravity and its own stiffness, creating a diagonal line that breaks the vertical dominance of walls and shelves. The leather is probably brown or burgundy, aged and softened by use, its surface showing scratches and scuffs that tell of being carried, of being set down and picked up, of traveling from place to place bearing its cargo of important papers, and the portfolio is closed, its contents hidden, secured perhaps by straps or ties that keep everything contained and organized. Its presence suggests work in progress, suggests documents that need to be consulted or that are waiting to be filed properly. And it adds to the sense that this library is not a museum where everything is permanently arranged, but rather a living workspace where materials move and circulate, where organization is an ongoing process rather than a completed state. A subtle glow emanates from a reading glasses case that sits on a surface nearby, catching light from lamps or moon and reflecting it back in a softer form. The case's material, perhaps leather or hard shell covered in fabric, having a slight sheen that makes it visible even in low light. The case is closed, protecting the glasses within from dust and scratches, and its compact form suggests careful attention to the small objects that support reading, that make the act of engaging with text possible for eyes that need assistance, that transform blurred letters into sharp, clear symbols that can be processed and understood. The glow it holds is modest, barely noticeable unless one is looking, but it serves as a small beacon, a marker that helps locate the glasses when they are needed, when the light has dimmed further or when small print becomes impossible to decipher without optical correction. And even this humble object participates in the library's overall aesthetic, contributes its small share to the ambient beauty that makes the space welcoming, that makes it feel considered and cared for in every detail. A quiet table stands with its slate top reflecting light in subtle ways. The stone surface smooth and cool, darker than wood and heavier, providing a different texture, a different quality than the oak and walnut and mahogany that dominate elsewhere. Slate is dense and stable, resistant to scratches and stains, and its color, gray or blue-gray or even slightly green depending on the stone's origin, provides visual contrast, provides a place where the eye can rest on something other than warm wood tones. The table's construction is simple, allowing the material itself to be the focal point, and the slate top might show very faint lines or variations in color that mark the stone's natural layering. The way it was formed in sheets that can be split apart, and touching this surface would be different from touching wood, would be cooler, harder, more insistent in its materiality, and this difference adds richness to the sensory experience of the library, prevents it from becoming monotonous even in its dedication to a particular aesthetic, a particular mood. Rain mists around the library lantern that hangs outside or sits visible through a window, the water in the air catching the light and creating a halo effect, a soft aureole of brightness that extends beyond the lantern's immediate glow, and the misting rain is fine, almost fog-like, composed of droplets too small to fall quickly, too light to make sound when they land, and they drift through the air on currents and breezes, coating surfaces with moisture that accumulates slowly, that darkens stone and makes metal glisten. The lantern itself continues to shine through the mist, its light dimmed but not extinguished, struggling against the water that tries to obscure it, and this image of light persisting through weather, of illumination maintaining itself despite conditions that would prefer darkness, has a quality of resilience, of determination, of the human impulse to push back against nature's tendency toward cold and wet and obscurity, to create pools of warmth and visibility even when the world would rather remain dark. A cozy armchair is positioned in a bay window, taking advantage of the additional space created by the window's projection outward from the wall, and the chair faces inward toward the library or outward toward the view depending on how it has been oriented. And either way it occupies a special position, a place that is neither fully inside nor outside, that sits in the transitional zone where architecture reaches toward the exterior world. The bay window's glass surfaces on three sides mean that sitting here in daylight would be bright, would be surrounded by natural illumination, but at night the glass becomes mirrors reflecting the room's interior light, becomes barriers beyond which only darkness is visible, and the armchair in this setting becomes an island, a place of perfect solitude where one can curl up with a blanket and a book and feel both protected and exposed, both hidden and visible, both part of the library and separate from it. The cushioning is deep and soft, the arms wide enough to rest cups or books on, and the whole arrangement invites extended occupation, invites someone to settle in for hours without moving, without needing anything except perhaps a lamp nearby and the company of whatever volume has been chosen for this session of reading, of escape, of immersion in worlds contained in pages. Books are fanned out on a low shelf, arranged not spine outward in the usual way but rather open slightly and overlapping, creating a display that shows covers or illustrated pages, that treats the books as objects to be appreciated visually as well as intellectually. The fanning creates a pattern like cards spread in a dealer's hand, like petals radiating from a center, and it makes each book partially visible while suggesting the presence of others behind, creating depth, creating the sense that more waits to be discovered, that what is immediately visible is only the beginning. This arrangement is less practical for storage, takes up more space per book, but it serves a different purpose, invites browsing in a different way, suggests that these particular volumes have been curated, have been selected for display because of their cover's beauty or their current relevance, or simply because someone decided they deserved this moment of prominence, this opportunity to catch attention and invite selection. Moonlight pools in a reading tray attached to a chair or positioned nearby. The tray designed to hold books at comfortable angles for reading, to provide surface area for setting down volumes temporarily, and the moonlight that falls upon it is concentrated by the tray's flat surface, reflected back and creating a patch of silvery brightness that stands out against surrounding shadows. The tray might be made of wood or metal, might swing into position on hinges or sit permanently fixed, and its surface shows where in the places where books rest most often, where hands grip most frequently, where the friction of use has polished or scratched or otherwise marked the material. The moonlight in the tray creates a stage, creates a spotlight that draws attention even though nothing sits upon it currently, and the emptiness of the tray combined with the beauty of the light upon it suggests potential, suggests that soon a book will be placed there, will be opened and read in this perfect illumination that requires no lamp, no candle, no artificial source, only the ancient light of the moon filtered through windows and falling exactly where it is needed, exactly where it can serve the fundamental human activity of reading, of processing symbols into meaning, of transforming ink and paper into ideas and emotions, and the expansion of consciousness that comes from encountering minds across distances of space and time. Thick corduroy covers the window seat, its ridged fabric soft and substantial, the wales running horizontally across the cushion creating texture that is visible and tactile, that catches light differently along each ridge and valley, creating subtle stripes of brightness and shadow. The corduroy is probably a deep color, burgundy or forest green or navy, and it has compressed over time in the places where people sit most frequently, the wales flattened slightly but still maintaining their distinctive character, their ribbed pattern that makes corduroy unmistakable even at a glance. The window seat beneath this cushion is built into the wall, a permanent fixture that uses the depth of the window's recess to create a perch, a place to sit with legs drawn up, back against one side wall, looking either out at the night or in at the library, and the corduroy cushion makes this architectural feature comfortable, transforms hard wood or stone into something yielding, something that invites extended sitting, extended contemplation, extended periods of watching rain or reading or simply existing in that particular spot that belongs neither fully to interior nor to exterior but occupies the threshold between them. The shadow of the latter stretches across the far wall, elongated and dramatic, cast by light sources positioned at angles that cause the shadow to climb higher than the ladder itself actually reaches, to exaggerate its height and make it seem monumental, almost threatening in its scale despite the ladder's actual modest proportions. The shadow includes every rung, every detail of the ladder's construction, rendered in silhouette, in pure absence of light, and as lamps flicker or as one's position changes, the shadow shifts, grows and shrinks, moves across the wall's surface like something alive, like something independent of its source. The wall it falls upon might be painted or papered, might be interrupted by other shelves or by doorways, and the shadow negotiates these obstacles, climbs over them or is broken by them, creating a fragmented image that must be mentally reconstructed, that requires the viewer to understand what they are seeing, to connect the pieces into a coherent whole, and this act of interpretation, of making sense from partial information, is its own form of meditation, its own gentle exercise for a mind. Preparing to let go of wakefulness. A warm bulb glows within a frosted glass shade, the glass translucent rather than transparent, diffusing the light and preventing harsh glare, creating illumination that is soft and even, that spreads gently into the surrounding space without creating sharp boundaries between light and dark. The frosting might be uniform or might create patterns, swirls, or textures molded into the glass when it was formed, and these patterns become visible when the light is on, revealed as variations in opacity that create subtle designs that add visual interest to what might otherwise be a simple functional object. The warmth of the bulb is not just visual but thermal, the shade becoming slightly warm to the touch, radiating heat as well as light, and this dual output makes the fixture more than just a source of visibility, makes it a small hearth, a gathering point for warmth that attracts and comforts, that creates a microclimate of increased temperature that makes the space around it feel more welcoming, more inhabited, more alive with the energy that comes from controlled combustion or electrical resistance transformed into photons and heat. Dust rests on gilt-edged pages, the gold leaf or gold paint that decorates the page edges having provided a surface where dust settles and becomes particularly visible because of the contrast between the metallic gleam and the pale gray of accumulated particles. The gilt edges were applied to make books beautiful, to make them precious, to elevate them beyond mere vessels for text into objects of art, of value, of status, and the gold still shines where dust has not claimed it, still catches light and throws it back in warm flashes, but where dust has settled the gold is muted, is hidden beneath a veil that can be removed with a gentle cloth or a soft brush, but that for now simply exists as evidence of time passing, of the book sitting undisturbed, of the slow constant rain of particles that falls in every room, in every building, covering everything with the same democratic coating that makes no distinction between precious and common, between valued and forgotten. Rain lines blur the glow of a street lamp visible through the window, the water running down the glass in rivulets that distort and fragment the distant light source, turning one steady lamp into dozens of small lights that streak and merge, that create vertical lines of amber or yellow that seem to move even though the lamp itself is stationary. The effect is painterly, is impressionistic, turns the view through the window into something that could be a canvas, a rendering in light and water of the world outside, and watching these blurred lines of illumination is soothing, is hypnotic, is a form of visual white noise that occupies attention without demanding it, that allows the mind to rest while the eyes continue to receive input that is beautiful but meaningless, that carries no information that must be processed or remembered, that simply exists as sensation, as aesthetic experience, as one more layer in the complex multisensory environment that the library provides. A nook is fitted with an adjustable desk lamp, the kind with joints that allow the shade and arm to be positioned exactly where light is needed, to be angled and aimed with precision so that illumination falls on a book or a notebook or whatever work is being undertaken without spilling over unnecessarily into areas where it is not needed. The lamp's construction is mechanical, is visible, showing hinges and screws and the tension springs that hold the arm in whatever position it is placed. And this visible mechanism has its own beauty, its own interest, speaking to engineering principles and the pleasure of objects that do their jobs well, that have been designed with care and manufactured with precision. The lamp sits on a small desk or shelf within the nook, clamped perhaps to the edge or standing on its own weighted base, and its presence transforms the nook from simply a place to sit into a place to work, to read with intention, to engage in activities that require good light and the ability to control that light according to changing needs and tasks. A folding screen stands partially open, its wooden slats arranged in parallel, creating a barrier that is neither solid nor transparent, but something in between, allowing glimpses through the gaps while still suggesting separation, still marking a boundary between one area and another. The slats are thin and uniform, perhaps stained or painted, perhaps left natural, and they are connected by fabric or leather hinges that allow the screen to fold accordion style, to be collapsed for storage or expanded to its full width when needed. The screen casts shadows of its own, the slats creating lines of darkness on floor and wall that mirror the physical structure, and it serves both practical and aesthetic purposes, providing privacy or visual separation while also adding architectural interest, adding vertical elements that break up open space, that create rooms within rooms, zones within zones, that allow the library to be subdivided without the permanence of walls, without losing the flexibility that comes from temporary boundaries that can be moved or removed according to need. Gentle light falls on a woven doormat positioned at an entrance or transition between sections, the mat's textured surface of braided or looped fibers creating patterns of light and shadow in miniature, the raised portions catching illumination while the recessed areas remain darker. The mat is functional, meant to catch dirt and moisture from shoes, to protect the floors beyond from the debris that gets tracked in from outside or from less clean areas, but it is also decorative, chosen for its color and pattern, for the way it contributes to the overall aesthetic rather than simply serving utilitarian purpose. The weaving creates geometric designs or organic patterns depending on the technique used, and the fibers themselves, perhaps natural sisal or coir or synthetic materials, have texture that is visible and tactile, that provides grip underfoot, that makes the transition from one surface to another noticeable, that marks the passage from one space to another not just visually but through the sensation of different material against the soles of feet or shoes. Shelves are fitted with brass rail guards that run along their front edges, preventing books from sliding forward and falling, keeping volumes contained even when shelves are tightly packed or when the building settles, or when vibrations from passing traffic or other sources might otherwise cause books to shift. The rails are simple in design, rods of brass supported by small brackets at intervals, but they are polished or have developed a patina, and they catch light and create horizontal lines of brightness that emphasize the shelves' geometry, that draw the eye along their length and help organize the visual complexity of hundreds or thousands of spines into something more comprehensible, more structured. The brass is smooth and cool, pleasant to touch when reaching for a book, and the rails serve their protective function invisibly until one notices them, until one realizes that without these guards the books would be more vulnerable, more likely to suffer damage, and their presence is another example of thoughtful design, of care extended to the collection, of measures taken to preserve and protect what has been gathered here. A moonbeam strikes a crystal paperweight, entering the glass and being refracted, broken into its component colors, sent in multiple directions at once, creating small rainbows that dance on nearby surfaces and turn the simple object into a prism, into a device for revealing the hidden complexity of seemingly simple white light. The paperweight is probably a dome or pyramid of cut crystal, heavy enough to hold papers down against drafts, clear enough to see through to whatever lies beneath, and the moon's light passing through it is transformed, is multiplied, is celebrated in the burst of color that emerges from the crystal's far side. The paperweight sits on a desk or shelf, serving its function of adding weight, of keeping order. But in this moment when moonlight finds it, it transcends utility and becomes pure beauty, becomes a small miracle of physics and craft, becomes evidence that the right conditions can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, that light and glass and angle can combine to create something that stops the breath, that commands attention, that reminds us why humans have always been drawn to crystals and gems and transparent stones that capture light and give it back transformed into something more complex, more beautiful, more worthy of wonder than the raw photons that arrived from the sun, bounced off the moon, passed through the window, and found this particular object waiting to receive them and make them into art. A plush rug stretches across the hallway floor, its thick pile muffling footsteps and absorbing the small sounds that would otherwise echo through the corridor, creating silence where there might be noise, creating softness where there might be hardness. The rug is woven from wool or a blend that gives it weight and resilience, its fibers dense enough to provide cushioning, deep enough that feet sink slightly into its surface, and the colors are rich and complex. Perhaps a Persian pattern of intertwined botanical forms, perhaps a simpler design of geometric shapes in complementary hues. And these colors have faded slightly with age and exposure to light, becoming softer, more harmonious, more integrated with the overall atmosphere of aged beauty that pervades the library. The rug transforms the hallway from a passage to be hurried through into a space worth lingering in, worth appreciating, and its presence speaks to care, to the desire to make even transitional spaces comfortable and aesthetically pleasing, to ensure that every part of the library receives attention and consideration. Rain taps in rhythmic patterns on the roof overhead, each drop striking with its own small sound that combines with countless others to create a continuous percussion that is both random and ordered, both chaotic and musical. The rhythm emerges from the rain's intensity, from the size of drops and the speed at which they fall, and it changes as the storm ebbs and flows, sometimes accelerating into a rush of sound that borders on white noise, sometimes slowing to distinct individual impacts that can be counted, that create space between themselves where silence returns briefly before the next drop falls. The roof might be slate or tile or metal, and each material produces its own characteristic sound when struck by water, and these sounds travel down through the ceiling and into the library below, becoming part of the sonic environment, adding their voice to the ticking clock and the settling wood and all the other small sounds that fill what might otherwise be mistaken for silence, but that is actually a rich tapestry of quiet noises that require stillness to perceive, that reward attention. With their subtle complexity, a lamp chain dangles from the fixture overhead, swaying slightly with air movement, its links of metal or beaded material creating a vertical line that catches light along its length, that moves with a gentle hypnotic rhythm that draws the eye and holds it. The chain is functional, meant to be pulled to turn the lamp on or off, and it hangs at a length that makes it accessible from standing position, its end perhaps finished with a pull in the shape of a teardrop or sphere or some decorative element that provides grip and adds visual interest. The chain's movement is minimal but noticeable, a slight pendulum swing that responds to the opening of doors, to people passing nearby, to the subtle air currents that exist in every space, and watching this small motion is meditative, is soothing, is another element that contributes to the overall sense of gentle animation, of a space that is still but not static, quiet but not dead, resting but still alive with subtle energies and movements. A corner cabinet stands with glass doors that protect their contents while allowing them to be seen, creating a display case for special volumes or objects that deserve both preservation and visibility. The cabinet is wooden, probably matching the library's other furniture in style and finish, and the glass in its doors is clear and clean, perhaps slightly wavy if old, perhaps perfectly flat if more recently installed. And through this glass, the shelves within are visible, holding books that are too valuable or too fragile for open shelving, volumes that are leather-bound and gilt-edged, that are first editions or rare printings or personal treasures that require protection from dust and handling. The cabinet's doors might have small brass knobs or keys that turn in locks, adding security to the protection that glass provides, and the whole piece stands as a kind of shrine, a place where the most precious items are housed and honored, where their specialness is acknowledged through the extra care taken in their storage. An open folio rests on a velvet stand, the large pages spread wide to display whatever illustration or text they contain, and the stand holds the book at an angle that makes viewing comfortable, that prevents strain, that treats the folio as something to be contemplated rather than merely consulted. The velvet of the stand is thick and soft, protecting the book's cover from scratches, providing a cushion support that will not damage leather or cloth bindings, and the color of the velvet is probably deep, burgundy or emerald or midnight blue, creating contrast with the cream or white of the folio's pages. The book itself is oversized, too large to be comfortably held, requiring this dedicated furniture for proper display, and its pages might show maps or botanical illustrations or astronomical charts, images rendered with care and precision, with beauty that justifies this special treatment, this positioning that invites pause and study and appreciation rather than quick scanning and moving on. Night shadows gather in the vaulted ceiling, collecting in the angles where curved surfaces meet, where ribs or beams create pockets that light cannot fully penetrate, and these shadows are deep and complex, layered and textured, holding within them the suggestion of vast height, of space that extends upward beyond easy comprehension. The vaulting creates a sense of grandeur, of ecclesiastical dignity, as though the library were a cathedral dedicated not to worship but to learning, not to prayer but to reading, and the shadows in this elevated architecture add mystery, Add the sense that the space contains more than can be seen, that its full dimensions are only partially revealed, that looking up is to encounter darkness that might hold anything or nothing, that invites imagination to populate it with whatever seems appropriate, angels or gargoyles or simply the accumulated dust and cobwebs of decades settling in places no ladder can reach. Warm glow outlines the window frame, light from interior sources catching the edges of wood or stone that surrounds the glass, creating a border of brightness that defines the window's shape, that makes it stand out against the darker wall, that draws attention to the threshold between inside and outside, between shelter and exposure. The frame is substantial, made to last, carved perhaps with simple decoration or left plain depending on the building style, and the light that outlines it comes from lamps positioned nearby or from moonlight that enters and bounces off surfaces before returning to illuminate the frame from within. This outlining effect makes the window seem like a portal, like a frame for viewing not just the world outside but the night itself as a kind of artwork, as something contained and made comprehensible by being bounded, by being given edges and limits that help the mind grasp what would otherwise be too vast, too infinite to fully apprehend. A ladder hook curves at the ceiling track's end, designed to catch and hold the ladder when it reaches this terminal point, to prevent it from rolling beyond its designated range, to keep it from crashing into walls or other furniture. The hook is simple, functional, probably made of the same metal as the track itself, and it curves in a shape that guides rather than abruptly stops, that slows the ladder's momentum gradually, that treats the equipment with care even as it enforces boundaries. The hook is barely visible from floor level, noticeable only if one looks up and traces the track to its conclusion. But its presence is essential, is part of the system that makes the ladder safe and reliable, that ensures it can be used without worry, without the fear that comes from equipment that is not properly maintained or bounded. And even this small detail speaks to thoroughness, to the attention paid to every element of the library's design and maintenance. A still teapot sits on a sideboard, its form rounded and substantial, its spout pointed and its handle curved for grip, and the pot is probably porcelain or ceramic, decorated perhaps with painted patterns or left plain in a solid color that complements the room's palette. The teapot is not steaming, not freshly filled, but rather waiting in the state that teapots occupy most of the time. Ready for use but not currently employed, a vessel that contains potential, that suggests the possibility of tea being made, of cups being filled, of small breaks taken from reading to sip something warm and soothing before returning to books and study. The sideboard beneath it is a piece of furniture designed for service, for holding dishes and serving pieces, for providing a surface at the right height for working, and its presence adds another layer of domesticity to the library, reminds us that intellectual spaces still require bodily comfort, still benefit from the small rituals of hospitality and self-care that tea represents. Dust settles in a quiet beam of light, drifting downward through air that has stopped moving, and the beam makes each particle visible for the duration of its passage through the illuminated zone, creating a vertical column of dancing specks that are invisible before they enter the light and invisible after they leave it, but that exist in a state of perfect visibility while they traverse this particular space. The settling is slow, governed by gravity and air resistance, and the dust moves with the randomness of Brownian motion, jittering and drifting on molecular currents too small to sense but large enough to affect particles this size. The beam itself is probably sunlight or moonlight entering through a window, concentrated by the angle of entry into a visible shaft, or perhaps it is artificial light from a fixture positioned just so, and the dust within it creates a visual representation of air's texture, air's substance, reminds us that what seems like empty space is actually full of matter, full of material that floats and falls and eventually covers everything, that connects all moments through its constant presence. Its patient accumulation on every surface in every room where time passes and movement occurs. Soft lamp light fades into the deeper night, dimming as bulbs cool or as wicks burn lower, as the sources of illumination exhaust their energy or their fuel and begin the slow transition toward darkness, toward the complete absence that will come eventually but that for now is held at bay by these last reserves of brightness. The fading is gradual, almost imperceptible from moment to moment, noticeable only when compared to memory of how bright the light was an hour ago, 2 hours ago, when evening first settled and lamps were lit with full intensity, and this slow diminishment creates a sense of time passing, of the night progressing through its stages, of moving inexorably toward the moment when all artificial light will cease and only moonlight will remain, only starlight, only the faint glow that comes from distant sources beyond these walls. The fading light makes everything it touches seem softer, seem more distant, seem to be withdrawing into itself, preparing for the rest that darkness brings, the restoration that comes from absence of stimulation, from surrender to the natural cycle that demands we release our hold on visibility and trust in the return of light that morning will bring. Warm glow lingers on the table's surface, the wood holding onto the light that has fallen upon it throughout the evening, seeming to emit rather than merely reflect the illumination, as though the table has absorbed warmth and brightness and now releases it back slowly, gradually, giving up what it has gathered with reluctance. The glow makes the grain visible in soft detail, makes the small imperfections and variations beautiful rather than flawed, and it creates a pool of visibility that draws the eye, that suggests this is still a place where activity could happen, where a book could be opened, where hands could rest and eyes could focus even as the surrounding space grows darker, grows quieter, grows more committed to the idea of rest. The table's surface seems almost alive with this retained light, seems to pulse gently with warmth that is both visual and thermal, and sitting near it would be comforting, would be a form of companionship, would be evidence that even inanimate objects can offer something that feels like presence, like care, like the desire to provide whatever comfort they are capable of providing. Moonlight rests against the shelves, leaning there like something tired, something ready to settle and stay, no longer moving as it did earlier when the moon's angle was different, when the light entered at a steeper trajectory and swept across surfaces with more energy, more insistence. Now the moonlight simply rests, content to illuminate what it touches without striving to reach further, without pushing into shadows or trying to overcome darkness in places where darkness has always been strong. The shelves it touches are transformed, their wood seeming paler, their books taking on silvery edges that make them look different from how they appear in lamplight, less warm but more mysterious, less immediate but more dreamlike, and the boundary between where moonlight reaches and where it does not become softer, becomes a gradual transition rather than a sharp line, as though light and dark have negotiated a peace, have agreed to coexist without struggle, without the constant tension that defined their relationship earlier in the evening when both were more insistent about claiming territory. Quiet curves of polished would arc and bend throughout the space, the furniture's edges rounded rather than sharp, the architectural details following organic lines rather than rigid geometry. And these curves catch light along their lengths, creating highlights that emphasize their gentle sweeping forms, that make them seem fluid even though they are solid, that suggest movement even though nothing is actually moving. The polish on the wood has deepened its color and enhanced its reflectivity, and the curves become pathways for the eye to follow, leading from one element to another, connecting different parts of the library through visual flow, through the rhythm created by repeating shapes and similar angles. The curves are restful to look at, lack the aggression of corners and points, and they seem to gather the room's warmth and calmness and concentrate it, seem to embody in their physical form the qualities that make this space feel safe, feel welcoming, feel like somewhere the body and mind can both relax without reservation. Gentle reflections travel along the walls, caught in varnish or gloss paint, in the glass of framed pictures or the polished surfaces of wall-mounted fixtures, creating secondary images that are dimmer than their sources but that multiply the light, that distribute it more widely than the original beams and flames could reach on their own. The reflections are soft and blurred, lacking the sharp definition of mirrors, showing only general shapes and colors, only the impression of light rather than its precise duplication, and they create a sense that the walls themselves are participating in the illumination, are helping to hold back darkness, are contributing their small part to maintaining visibility even as night deepens and primary light sources diminish. The reflections shift as one moves or as light sources flicker, creating subtle animation, creating the sense that the walls are breathing, are responding to what happens in the space they enclose, are not just passive barriers but active participants in creating the library's atmosphere. Unread stories wait inside the spines that line these shelves, thousands of narratives and arguments and observations compressed into bound volumes, held suspended in potential, ready to spring into life when pages are opened, when eyes begin to scan lines, when minds engage with the symbols printed there and transform them back into the thoughts that originated them, that gave them form and substance. The stories are patient, having waited years or decades or longer, having no sense of time passing, no impatience or frustration at remaining unread, simply existing in their stored state as surely as seeds exist in the ground before spring, as surely as potential energy exists in objects held at height before they fall. Each spine represents a doorway into another world, another consciousness, another way of seeing and understanding, and they wait there together, creating a landscape of possibility, a forest of paths not taken, a library of lives not lived except through the imagination that reading makes possible. And their presence is both comforting and overwhelming, both invitation and reminder of limitation, of the impossibility of reading everything, of experiencing everything, of the necessary choices that must be made about where to direct finite attention. Dim outlines fade into shadow, objects losing their definition as light withdraws, becoming suggestions rather than certainties, becoming shapes that must be recognized through memory and context rather than through clear visual information. The fading happens at different rates for different objects. Things closer to remaining light sources maintain clarity longer, while those in corners or behind other furniture disappear first, becoming absorbed into darkness that erases detail, that simplifies everything into masses of lesser and greater darkness, into a topography of shadow where depth is suggested but not confirmed. The outlines that remain are like pencil sketches, like drawings that show only essential forms without filling in textures or secondary details, and navigating this increasingly simplified visual environment requires trust, requires remembering where things are positioned, requires accepting that not everything needs to be seen to be known, that darkness does not erase what it conceals but only makes it temporarily invisible, temporarily protected from the gaze that daylight and lamplight make possible. Raindrops slow against the glass, the storm's intensity diminishing, the precipitation becoming lighter, more intermittent, individual drops now visible where before there was only continuous flow, only the blur of water moving too quickly to distinguish separate elements. The slowing creates a change in sound, the constant percussion becoming punctuated rhythm, the white noise becoming music with spaces between notes, with silence that allows each impact to be heard distinctly before the next one arrives. The drops that still fall leave trails that are thinner, that evaporate more quickly, that do not immediately merge with others to create the thick rivulets that characterized the earlier heavier rain. And watching this transition from storm to drizzle to eventual cessation is like watching urgency transform into calm, like witnessing intensity give way to gentleness, like seeing nature itself demonstrate the principle of gradual decrease, of systems winding down, of processes approaching completion and rest. Shelves become darker shapes against walls that are themselves darkening, losing their individual identities as repositories of specific books and becoming instead simple masses, simple presences that define the room's architecture, that mark boundaries and create the sense of enclosure without revealing details about what they hold or how they are organized. The transformation happens so slowly that it is difficult to notice when each shelf crosses the threshold from visible to merely sensed, from known through sight to known through memory and spatial awareness. And this gradual obscuring is not threatening but rather restful, is part of the natural progression of evening into night, of activity into dormancy, of the library releasing its hold on being a place of work and study and becoming instead a place of rest, of sleep, of dreams that require darkness to flourish, that need the absence of external stimulation to generate their own internal visions. The rooms sink softly towards sleep, the whole space seeming to settle and relax, to release tension held during daylight hours when purposes were clear and activities were defined, when the library was a place for reading and research and the pursuit of knowledge, and now yielding to the simpler purpose of providing shelter through the night, of holding space for rest, of waiting patiently for morning when light will return and purposes will sharpen again and another day of engagement with books and ideas will become possible. The sinking is collective, is something that affects every element simultaneously. Furniture and books and air and light all participating in this gentle descent, all contributing to the transformation of the library from workspace to dream space, from a place of doing to a place of being, from somewhere defined by activity to somewhere defined by stillness, by quiet, by the deep rest that comes when all striving ceases and existence becomes enough, becomes all that is required, becomes the only thing happening in these rooms that hold so much knowledge, but that now, in this moment, ask nothing except that we allow ourselves to drift, to float, to surrender to the pull of sleep that grows stronger with each passing moment, with each dimming lamp, with each slow breath that carries us deeper into the night's embrace. Narrow halls quiet fully, the last echoes of movement and sound absorbed into walls and floors and ceiling until nothing remains but the profound stillness that comes when all activity has ceased, when no footsteps cross the wooden planks, when no pages turn in distant rooms, when even breathing seems too loud for the depth of silence that has settled like snow over everything. The halls stretch away into darkness, their length no longer measurable by sight but only by memory, by the knowledge of how many steps it takes to traverse them, how many doorways must be passed, how many intersections navigated. And in this complete quiet they seem longer than they are, seem to extend infinitely into shadows that hold nothing threatening, only more silence, more darkness, more of the peace that comes from absolute cessation of disturbance. The narrowness that might feel confining in daylight becomes comforting now, becomes an embrace, becomes walls that stand close enough to provide protection, to create a corridor that guides rather than restricts, that channels whatever energy remains toward rest, toward stillness, toward the complete quieting of body and mind. Lamps dim to their softest glow, burning at the lowest intensity their mechanisms allow, giving just enough light to prevent complete darkness but no more than that, creating illumination that is barely brighter than its absence, that exists at the threshold where visibility and invisibility meet and merge. The glow they produce is warm and minimal, creating small halos around themselves, small islands of faint brightness that do not connect, that leave large territories of shadow untouched and unchallenged. And this minimal lighting is sufficient, is exactly what is needed for a space that is transitioning fully into night mode, into sleep mode, into the state where darkness is not an enemy to be fought but a friend to be welcomed, a condition that facilitates the deep rest that can only come when visual stimulation is reduced to nearly nothing, when the eyes have nothing demanding their attention and can finally close, finally release their constant vigilant scanning of the environment and trust that darkness holds no dangers, only the gift of invisibility that allows consciousness to turn inward, to explore interior landscapes rather than exterior ones. Dust settles where air slows to complete stillness, the particles that have been suspended and drifting all evening finally coming to rest on surfaces that will hold them until the next disturbance, the next opening of doors or movement of bodies that will lift them again and set them circulating through new paths, new trajectories. The settling is so gradual that it cannot be observed, can only be inferred from the way surfaces appear slightly grayer, slightly less distinct than they were hours ago, and the dust adds itself to previous layers, becomes part of the accumulated residue of time passing, of air moving through space carrying with it the microscopic debris of existence, fibers and skin cells and pollen and all the other organic and inorganic particles that fill every environment where life happens, where decay proceeds, where matter is constantly being broken down into smaller and smaller components that eventually become indistinguishable from air itself, from the medium through which we move and which we breathe and which connects all things in the library through its invisible presence. Warmth hugs corners and floors, settling into low places where cold air would naturally collect, And this warmth is the residue of the day, the heat that has been generated by lamps and bodies and the friction of movement, now radiating back from walls and furniture, from the thermal mass of wood and stone that absorbed energy throughout the evening and now releases it slowly, creating pockets of comfort in spaces that might otherwise grow chill as night deepens. The warmth is not uniform but patchy, stronger near heat sources and weaker in areas farther from them, creating a topography of temperature that adds another dimension to the space beyond the purely visual, that makes different areas feel different even if they look the same. And this warmth is a gift, is the library's way of caring for whatever occupies it, of providing the physical comfort that allows bodies to relax, allows muscles to release their tension, allows the constant low-level stress of maintaining body temperature to decrease as the environment meets the body halfway, makes the work of staying warm easier, makes the transition into sleep smoother and more natural. Silence deepens beneath the rain, the two phenomena paradoxically coexisting, the sound of water falling and striking surfaces, and beneath it or within it or alongside it, a silence that has nothing to do with the absence of sound and everything to do with the absence of human noise, of mechanical noise, of anything that would disrupt the natural rhythm of precipitation. The rain becomes part of the silence rather than interrupting it, becomes a form of quiet noise that enhances rather than diminishes the sense of peace, that creates a boundary of sound between the library and whatever exists beyond it, that wraps the space in a cocoon of white noise that filters out intrusions, that makes the interior feel even more protected, even more removed from the world's demands and disturbances. The silence beneath the rain is where thoughts dissolve, where worries lose their urgency, where the mind can finally stop its constant processing and planning and simply exist in the moment, listening to water fall without needing to make meaning from it, without needing to respond to it or analyze it or do anything except acknowledge its presence and allow it to continue its work of marking time, of filling space with sound that asks nothing, that requires nothing, that simply is. Moonlight thins into silver threads, the moon having moved lower in its arc or having been partially obscured by clouds, and what was earlier a strong beam becomes now a fragile tracery of illumination. Lines of light so fine they seem barely there, seem like something that might vanish entirely if observed too closely or if conditions change even slightly. These threads of moonlight find their way through the smallest gaps in curtains, through the spaces between window frames and walls, through cracks and openings that would be invisible in daylight but that become passages for this attenuated light that has traveled so far and been reduced so much but that still persists, still reaches into the library's interior with the last of its strength. The threads create delicate patterns on walls and floors, create lines that might be mistaken for cracks or for the edges of shadows, and they illuminate nothing substantially but they transform what they touch, make it seem magical, make it seem as though the library exists not entirely in the real world but partly in some other realm where physics works differently, where light can be solid and shadows can have weight, and where the boundary between sleeping and waking becomes as thin as these silver threads that connect interior to exterior, earth to sky, darkness to the source of all illumination that watches from above. Books rest in their tall rows, no longer individual volumes with distinct identities but a collective presence, a mass of accumulated knowledge and story that stands together in solidarity, in mutual support, each book holding up its neighbors, each spine contributing to the overall structure that makes the library what it is. The books have released whatever separateness they possessed during the day when titles were legible, when covers could be distinguished, when each volume asserted its own importance, and they have merged into something larger than their individual selves, have become a unified field of potential, of possibility, of all the worlds and ideas and perspectives they contain held in suspension, waiting for morning when they will separate again into distinct entities, when they will once more offer themselves for selection and reading. For now they simply rest, fulfilling their primary function, which is to exist, to preserve what has been written, to stand as testament to human efforts to understand and explain and imagine. And their presence is solid and comforting even in darkness, even when they cannot be seen clearly, because knowing they are there is enough, trusting in their continued existence is enough, and their quiet resting becomes an example, becomes an invitation to rest as fully and as completely as they do. Chairs remain still, their cushions unchanged from how they were last left, compressed in some places, smooth in others, holding the memory of bodies that have occupied them but no longer showing active use, no longer serving their function of support and comfort, but simply existing in potential, ready for the next person who will need them, who will sink into their softness and allow them to bear weight once more. The stillness is profound, is the stillness of objects that have no internal animation, no will of their own, no desire to move or change, and this complete passivity is restful to contemplate, is a reminder that not everything must be active, must be productive, must be engaged in constant doing, that there is value and dignity in simply being, in simply occupying space and waiting and trusting that purpose will return when it returns, that usefulness need not be constant to be real. The chairs in their stillness model the kind of rest that humans need but find difficult to achieve, the complete cessation of striving, the acceptance of being without doing, the trust that everything necessary will happen when it needs to happen and that for now, this moment, nothing is required except presence, except existence, except the patience to wait in stillness until movement becomes necessary again. Night lingers in every shadow, has claimed every corner and crevice, every space where light does not reach or reaches only weakly, and the night is not aggressive in its claiming but gentle, is not forcing itself on the space but rather filling the places that have been offered to it, that have been surrendered willingly by a library that understands the rhythm of light and dark, of activity and rest, of visibility and invisibility. The night in these shadows is thick and soft, is darkness that has substance, that can almost be felt, that wraps around objects and cushions them, that creates a protective layer between things and the world, and this lingering night is the final gift the library offers, the completion of its transformation from public space to private refuge, from place of learning to place of dreaming, from somewhere we come to work to somewhere we can finally, fully, completely let go and allow sleep to claim us as thoroughly as night has claimed these shadows, these corners, these quiet spaces between shelves. A library breathing in calm, the entire structure seeming to inhale and hold, to draw in the peace that has accumulated throughout the evening, to absorb the stillness and the silence and the darkness and the warmth, and to hold all of it together in one unified experience of perfect rest, of complete tranquility, of the profound satisfaction that comes from being exactly where one needs to be, doing exactly what needs to be done, which in this moment is nothing, is simply existing in this space that has prepared itself so carefully for exactly this purpose, holding the quiet as the world falls asleep, maintaining the stillness that allows consciousness to release its grip on wakefulness, providing the shelter and safety and comfort that bodies and minds require to surrender finally to sleep, to dreams, to the rest that restores and renews and makes tomorrow possible. And the library holds all of this with infinite patience, with perfect grace, with the certainty that this moment will pass as all moments pass, but that for now, for these hours of darkness, it serves its highest purpose simply by being here, by being still, by being quiet, by being the container for sleep that we all need, the sanctuary that asks nothing and gives everything, the space where we can finally stop, finally rest, finally allow the night to carry us wherever night carries those who trust it, who surrender to it, who release themselves into its care and wake in morning light renewed, restored, and grateful for this place that held us while we slept.